everybody, what's going on? Hellmite here, bringing you another video from Grab the Lantern today. It's Tuesday and the patch notes for patch 10.16 have been posted, and that means it's time for another patch note rundown. As always, I'll be going through the biggest changes in this week's patch and letting you guys know what you can be looking forward to in the coming weeks. Now, 10.16 is a weird one for a bunch of reasons here. First and foremost is that it will be live until 10.18, which, where's 10.17, you might ask? Well, Riot is taking off some time in order to give their employees some time to rest and recharge, especially since everyone's working from home and trying to deal with the whole separation of home life and work life. So I do think that's a good idea. I'm happy that Riot are giving their employees some time off, but suffice to say 10.16 will be live for a significantly longer period of time than we would expect. The other reason this patch is weird is that we are gearing up for Worlds, which means 10.16 is trying to really just tap down the champions that are very, very strong right now and slightly buff up some champions that are in edge cases. That means that there are a lot of changes in this week's patch, but also that they aren't as impactful because they're just trying to very slightly tweak champions that are close to viability. So in that regard, we're not going to see anything crazy like huge changes to various champions. We're not going to see a lot of champions that don't have a shot at being competitively viable. Instead, we're going to see a ton of champions that are close and very small changes on top of that. So I'm just going to be talking about the most important ones here. You're welcome to read the full patch notes if you so choose, but I'm just going to cover the ones that I think have the highest possibility of affecting the pro play meta in particular, or at the very least the ones that I think are going to have the biggest impact on regular play. First and foremost, Yone is going to be coming out on this patch, so we can all be excited for yet another edgy sword boy to be added to the game. Yasuo 2.0. Look, he's going to be fun to play. I think he's going to be just as obnoxious as Yasuo, but he should be fun to play at the very least, so that will be nice. Going on and talking about my first big change here, which is Bard, this is a weird one to talk about because Bard has not been meta for the longest period of time, but he's finally been really showing up in pro play as a powerful support pick. So he is getting some actually fairly hefty nerfs here. The base health going down by 15 does mean that Bard is significantly squishier and more vulnerable to all-ins, so he doesn't kind of have that extra flab to keep him safe. In Caretaker Shrine's maximum heal has gone down by 15 at all ranks. Now, this doesn't sound like a big deal, but this is basically saying this shrine has been sitting here for, 10 seconds, 15 seconds. It's finally blossomed, and you only get 55 health back. That feels pretty bad. It does a lot to tone down Bard's abilities to sort of endlessly sustain in a lane, and it really reinforces that Bard needs to be playing more proactively. He needs to be looking for either roaming plays or for cosmic bindings in lane, and his ability to just kind of sit back, tank some damage, and heal up afterwards is going down. So that is a very relevant change, something to keep in mind for Bard players going forward. Evelynn is back in the patch notes this week. Now, this is kind of fun because it does actually buff up Evelynn's lane presence. Now, Hate Spike had this mechanic where it had a long cooldown, but if you hit a monster with the initial spike, the cooldown was refunded by 50% in order to let Evelynn farm the jungle quickly, but without giving her too much power in gank situations where you just kind of spam your Q as much as possible. Now, that is getting changed in order to clear up some confusion, but it is just a straight buff, because having Hate Spike on a constant 4-second cooldown means her DPS in fights is better, her wave clear is better, and in general, she has more opportunity to do some damage. So, I do actually quite like this change. It is a sizable bump to Evelynn. I don't know that is enough to get her back into pro play because this doesn't change anything about jungle Evelynn, but especially if you've been looking to play her in a solo lane, this is the change that will get her there. Fiora is getting some small buffs on this patch as well. The cooldown on Lunge has been reduced by 3 seconds at early level and only by 2 down at the final rank. But the enemy hit cooldown reduction has been toned back as well. So I believe the cooldown ends up being roughly the same as it was before after you factor in that change. But just the fact that she has a lower cooldown on Lunge in the first place means that she has the ability to use this more defensively instead of having to always use it and hit something. Otherwise, it feels bad having a long cooldown. Just the fact that it's a lower cooldown across the board means that she can feel better about using this as a defensive tool to get out of dodge of an enemy skill shot or something. So this is a decent change to Fiora. Again, it's not that big of a deal. It's because she's sort of an edge case champion and Riot don't want to push too hard. But as someone who's already been kind of in a decent spot, I do think this is enough to make Fiora potentially a pick in some compositions. Going ahead and talking about Karma here now. Now, this is a big one because Karma has been such a solid flex pick in pro play for such a long time, and she has a lot of advantages that she brings to the table, regardless of whether or not she's in a solo lane or supporting. So, the mana cost on Inner Flame has gone up to 65 at all ranks. Now, this is technically a slight buff to her at the level 9 when she finally maxes out Inner Flame, but it does mean that until level 9, she is expending significantly more mana every time she uses Inner Flame, and the cooldown has also been increased by 2 seconds at all ranks. What this means is that Karma is going to have fewer Inner Flames, and they're going to cost her more mana throughout the laning phase, so you're not going to have to lane throughout this constant barrage of damage that Karma can bring to bear, because she will herself more quickly. She can't cast the ability as much. I think this is a pretty good change. I do feel like this is just going to kind of drop Karma off the face of the earth, because having the increased mana cost is really going to hurt her wave clear in a solo lane and really hurt her ability to harass and be that sort of aggressive bot lane support that we're used to seeing her as. It maybe be an edge case. She might crop up in some situations, but I do think that this is going to be sufficient to knock her down a peg. I want to touch on Karthus real quick. He did receive some buffs on the last patch. I talked about them a lot, and hey, turns out Karthus was really, really good. So, Riot are pulling back on some of the changes with the lay waste damage ratio going back to what it was before. He's still great. I do like all of the changes that Riot gave him on the previous patch. He just feels better to play now. But this was definitely a change that needed to happen, as this reduces his DPS significantly, which means he doesn't clear as fast, he doesn't do as much damage to minions, he doesn't do as much damage in team fights, so it's probably fine. I still think he's good, I still think he's an edge case champion, but definitely that change can be reverted. In a similar fashion, Kha'Zix got I didn't regard it as that big of a buff on the last patch, but turns out it was a big deal because Kha'Zix was everywhere over this patch. So Riot are trying to find a middle ground on the buff they gave Kha'Zix, because they don't want him to just go back to being not played, and him being really, really ridiculously good, especially in the skilled tier. So Q's isolated target bonus damage is going down to 110% rather than 100%, so he won't be doing quite as much damage as he is right now, but he's still going to be doing more damage than he was a couple patches ago. Talking about Lucian now. Lucian's been out of the meta for a while. He just has not been able to hold a candle to all of the other aggressive AD carries in lane. He just kind of gets bullied out. So Riot are trying to increase the amount of damage he deals to reward Lucian with a more aggressive playstyle and make him feel more rewarded when he is able to get some damage down. Piercing Light's damage is up by 10 at all ranks, which is a big deal. It is a DPS buff, and the culling actually fires more shots than it used to now, so all the way up to 34 at its maximum rank. So it's just a little bit more damage for Lucian, but hopefully it means that when he does opt into aggressive plays, he is more rewarded for doing so. Going on to Nautilus here, who's been present for such a long period of time as an aggressive bot lane support and being very just unmovable in lane due to how much damage he can soak with Titan's Wrath. That is being nerfed by 15 at all ranks, which feels really bad. I've touched on this in a previous video talking about Ornn changes where they reduce a tank's durability as opposed to their damage. I hate it when Riot does that because it just feels so bad for tanks, but I do understand that having a sort of spammable shield is really what was making Nautilus powerful and difficult to deal with. I feel like you could have increased the cooldown instead to make it so that there are more windows to get damage on Nautilus where he doesn't have access to Titan's Wrath. They might have looked into that and said, hey, we don't want to go for that route, so we'll nerf the shield and Titan's Wrath anyway. So it feels a little bad, but I do understand why Riot have opted into that. Neeko's got some small buffs here. Now, these are more relevant for a mid lane Neeko as opposed to something like the on-hit Neeko tops that we do occasionally see. The damage has gone up on Blooming Burst by 10 at maximum rank, actually at all ranks here, and the Bloom damage has also been increased by 5 at all ranks, so Neeko will be doing a little bit more damage across the board. This helps her wave clear, this helps her damage. Again, it's a small change, but I do feel like Neeko was already an edge case champion, and especially if we're looking to see her in the mid lane, this has potential to get her there. Nocturne is getting some small nerfs on this patch. He actually definitely needed this kind of a change. Umbral Blade's cooldown is now to 14 seconds from 10, but basic attacks against enemy champions and monsters reduce their cooldown by 3 full seconds. Now, what this means is that Nocturne is going to not be healing nearly as much when he's just passively hitting the wave, which is a big nerf to the sort of bruiser Nocturne's top or mid that we've been seeing. Unless Nocturne is actively gunning for enemy champions, he's just not going to have the sustain that he's used to right now that he just kind of got for free. It doesn't change his jungle at all. He still is going to have a similar cooldown on Umbral Blades as he did before, so jungle Nocturne is still viable, but lane Nocturne especially is just kind of dead now because it doesn't have as much sustain as it used to. Sett's here with a small little nerf I just want to touch on real quick here. Haymaker's base damage has gone down at its maximum rank, so Sett will be dealing slightly less damage if he does first max this ability, and Facebreaker's damage has also been reduced by 40 at maximum rank. Now that's a fair nerf. Facebreaker's always been more about the utility, and Haymaker did not get nerfed that much. The biggest thing is that Haymaker does so much true damage in the first place that the damage nerf doesn't matter too much. Now, this does really hurt the sort of tank Sett builds. He's supposed to be a bruiser. He's supposed to build some degree of AD, so I do like these changes as it sort of reinforces the fact that, hey, Sett, you can't coast by on your base values. You're going to have to build some damage if you want to be able to benefit from what you've got. Tristana, now this is a spicy change here. Tristana's explosive charge now deals 1% increased damage per 3% critical strike chance. Now, this means that she can get up to a third more damage on the explosion of explosive charge than she used to. Now, this was an ability where when it's max rank against a critical strike Tristana, you just kind of already died if she got it to full stacks. The fact that it now deals up to a third more damage if she's able to build full critical strike really means that Tristana will you just kind of die when this bomb explodes, especially if she got it fully stacked. So it makes her stronger in that particular case. It makes her stronger in general, just dealing damage across the game, even if she can't fully stack the ability, because it'll still do more damage based on her critical strike chance. It mostly is going to be a buff for her in the late stages of the game, because, like I said, this ability will just kind of kill you if you get hit by it, and it will really let her shred towers. So I do like this change. It doesn't really buff up her laning phase at all. It's mostly a late game focused change that is going to buff up her critical strike builds, so I do quite enjoy that. Volibear getting touched here just a little bit. Thundering Smash's bonus movement speed has gone down to 26% at its maximum rank. Now, it still doubles while moving towards enemy champions, but it does mean that he won't be able to just run you down as easily as he does before. It's a lot more viable to say, I can just kind of run away from him, and as long as I can stay away as long as possible, he won't be able to get in range for that stunning auto attack. So he still clears quite well. He's still this big, durable champion. He still has the Ohm Wrecker effect on his ultimate. This just makes it so he's a little less of an obvious pick up. I think he'll still be viable in pro play, hopefully not just like at 100% pick ban or just a really, really presence champion. Finally, I want to talk a little bit here about Yasuo. He is getting some buffs on this patch, and every time Yasuo gets buffed, I'm sort of like, really? Especially Yone's coming out too on this patch, really? But Riot are trying to make him a little bit better in pro play. Now, the magic resist buff, I'm fine with. I think it makes sense, especially for a champion that Riot want to be seeing play in the mid lane. Him having slightly higher magic resist makes him more resistant to enemy poke. But the last breath change here is nuts. This damage is up by 100 at maximum rank. You get hit by a last breath with a level 16 Yasuo, you just kind of die. This does so much damage now, and then gives him the armor penetration. He already had the extra crowd control on top of that. I think this is an absurd change for Yasuo. I don't want to say it's going to automatically make him meta, but I do think this means that Yasuo is more of a fringe pick. Well, maybe we want to go for him, and an option for the mid lane, especially if they're playing someone who Yasuo can trade with effectively. I can even see champions like Echo, for example, Yasuo being a good pick into if you really want to try and go for something silly, because I just feel like this change in particular is huge if you can give Yasuo the setup he wants. And sorry, one more real quick note here. Nimbus Cloak is getting nerfed down a little bit. The movement speed it grants is down by 5% no matter what kind of summoner spell you used for it. So this does make it slightly weaker. I think, though, at this point that given how the pros have discovered how well it works, especially with things like Smite, and especially with keeping AD carries safe, I think it's still going to get used. Hopefully, though, there are more options in the same category rather than just saying, well, of course you take Nimbus Cloak, duh. Anyways, that's going to be it for me today, guys. Thank you all so very much for watching. There are a lot of changes in this week's patch, so things are going to be just tweaked around the board, so I don't think we'll see some huge shakeups in the meta, but hopefully it does mean that some other sort of lower priority champions become actual options moving forwards. Let me know which changes you're most excited for down in the comments section below. If you enjoyed today's video, go ahead and leave a like, and if you really enjoyed today's video, consider subscribing. I upload a video every Monday, Friday, and on patch days like today as well. Once again, thank you guys so very much for watching. I do appreciate it. And I'll talk to you all later.